The two new arrivals have come in and claimed their beds, and I just autismed them out of here. Yeah, where was I? Actually, there was something that I missed. I was just going to say that, and I've touched on this before, but I haven't looked into it. I haven't looked into whether or how viable an idea this is. But I have a feeling it's getting quite entrenched as an area of research. Like it's a very plausible, viable hypothesis about autism, because autism, it's one of those strange things, like, there's that kind of, it's sort of like a joke, but it's a philosophical joke, and it's one that my dad told me, and it's like Theseus's ship. If you look up Theseus's ship, and it's the nature of identity, like what imbues something with its identity. And Theseus's ship was a ship that was constantly repaired, like a sea vessel that was constantly repaired, but it was repaired with new materials. So it prevailed through, I suppose, multiple generations or something, but it got to a point where there were no original parts, right? So there were all these, parts that make up a ship, but none of them are original. And so that is that's the quintessential sort of puzzle that metaphysicists of identity discuss. What is Theseus's ship still the ship? What makes it itself? Is it, but the simple version of that is sort of made as a bit of a joke, and it is a joke that it's about an axe or a hatchet or something. And it's like, there's a guy who said, this hatchet's been in our family for generations. But what they do is they keep replacing the head, and they keep replacing the handle, so you don't, like, what is it, what is identity? Is it a concept? Is it a function? Is it in identity metaphysics, there's a strong argument for, a continuous identity. And that's something that's happening to the, theories of autism. I love how I'm talking about the clothes that police packed. Good job, Kanan. You had one job. That they're now thinking maybe autism is not a developmental disorder. Maybe it's a developmental adaptation. And certainly my ability to think like a computer, because people think that I'm unemotional or cold-hearted or rigid. Not at all. I've had so many people do the Vulcan hand signal to me, which I had to look up because I'm not a Trekkie. But I know everyone knows who Spock is. And so, ironically, they were teasing me fondly, I suppose, by, sort of calling me sort of like an unemotional, an emotionally incompetent or an emotionally blind. Logic only being rather robotic and unable to factor in the emotional life of humankind. But I read up on the Vulcans, and they're right, but they don't know they're right, because the Vulcans are not unemotional whatsoever. Their culture is simply to remove emotions from their decision making. You can use someone's emotions as a premise in a logical syllogism. I'm a humanitarian. I factor in people's emotions because emotions are virtually the substance of our ability to experience pleasure and pain, which is basically sentience. Major ingredients of sentience, and a big argument on ethics boards, the ability to experience suffering and pleasure. So we can factor in those as premises, but that's very, very different than using your emotions to come to conclusions. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, then I don't know. So logic, unless you're doing sort of calculus, which is like linear algebra, which are syllogistic, but they're not formed in, syllogisms are usually, they're most helpfully expressed in kind of haiku style, I suppose. But you need at least two premises which are purportedly or treated to be statements about the state of affairs, state of reality, whether true or false. Logic has nothing to do with truth or falsity. It has to do with reasoning from premises, true or false. So the conclusion may be false. You can do the logic perfectly, but the conclusion can be false if one of the premises is false. And a lot of people have trouble with the idea that they can't separate, it's that fear of being seen to endorse something that they disagree with or that they think is morally wrong, But like a prime example is um, well, a lot of, so a reductio ad absurdum is something that you do in calculus, like lower predicate, lower predicate calculus, at least, which is very, very complicated, and you pose a question in sort of algebraic language, and you keep basically doing kind of truth table style analysis on the formula until you can find a contradiction using binary ones and zeros. And if you can find a contradiction, then the reductio fails and it's logical. I think that's how it goes. It's been a long time. But if you don't find a contradiction, it means that the absurd, or what is hypothesized to be absurd, is not absurd. And absurd doesn't mean stupid, it just means wrong. And when people do, you can do sort of verbal, natural language reductios where you take someone's argument, which is logically fallacious, even though it feels right. It feels right. And something feeling right is exactly what I'm talking about. You do not reason from your feelings, you reason from logic. You can put feelings in as premises, but you cannot use feelings to do logic. You do logic with it's just maths. The opinions do not come into logic, and there was this preposterous idea that there was going to be a feminist logic because logic was based on male thinking, and it's like, oh my fucking God, someone hasn't done logic. There is no female perspective on mathematics, I'm sorry. Maths is as pure as you can get to as close as you can get to just pure reality as a conduit to it, Physics is obviously based on it, and the more softer sciences should, are structured, you're less likely to get a reliable answer because you're doing inductive reasoning. Well, it's very hard to do deductive reasoning from sort of living things, but so it would be like, I'm just trying to remember this thing. So I got involved in this stupid fucking, God, I waste a lot of time on Twitter. I can tell you criminal court's a bit like Twitter. never remember subscribing, where there was this, they could just get these stupid fucking feminist fucking woke bullshit. So there was this guy, what was it? It was something like someone was commenting about leg hair and how women shouldn't have to shave their legs, and then some guy said, or maybe another woman said, like a bootlicker, because, women aren't allowed opinions unless they're feminist opinions, because feminists only listen to females' voices. And, oh dear, that it was a female, we're just going to call her a bootlicker. Anyway, someone had retorted that leg hair left to grow on women's legs was unattractive. And the comeback was, well, it's natural, so it's supposed to be there. And then a guy came back, I don't know if it was the original person who objected, but he said, well, cancer's natural too. Are you endorsing cancer? And then this feminist was like, and it was a female going, oh my God, you just compared women's leg hair to cancer, you fucking creep. And he's like, no, I didn't. And also, by the way, compare does not mean liken. You can compare all sorts of things. You can compare Hitler with Nelson Mandela. Doesn't mean you're likening them. It's like you're contrasting, right? But anyway, what they meant by compare was you are likening women's leg hair to cancer. And he's like, no, I'm not. But he knew what he was saying, but he didn't have he hadn't, unfortunately, we're not trained. We should be trained, as a matter of fact. This is one of the most basic things we should be taught. We should be taught this with maths and, basic arithmetic and handwriting and stuff like that. We should be taught these sorts of things. And he was really struggling to defend his point. He wasn't backing down, but he just didn't have the language to express it. And I did have the language to express it because I'm trained. But when you're talking to people who aren't trained and who aren't keen to learn, because I've explained to people who are very receptive and they go, oh man, I get it now. I get this, and they catch on really quickly, but they've got open minds. Like, explained it to a cousin of mine, and she's not academically trained. I mean, like, I bummed out of high school, and as a terrible student, undiagnosed ADHD. But I'm naturally logical anyway, so I did very well at philosophy in university. And she just had that logical mind, even though she had these beliefs about herself as being intellectually inferior. I was absolutely stoked with how quickly she caught on to these sorts of things. So what he was doing was a reductio ad absurdum, where he was using an extreme example in order to really show, like, it's like dialing up the contrast, where he's going, he's not saying that women's leg hair is like cancer. He's not talking about women's leg hair. He's talking about the justification. He's saying you cannot justify something being natural, or you cannot use the justification of something being natural to justify it being good or acceptable or whatever. He's not saying women's leg hair isn't acceptable. He's saying your argument does not support your claim. It doesn't mean that other arguments don't support the claim, but yours doesn't. Again, logic is not about truth or falsity. It's about supporting your claim with, depending on the circumstances, empiricism or reason. And in this case, it was a mostly reasoning error. And in this case, it's a logical fallacy known as the naturalistic fallacy. And then more broadly, the is-ought fallacy, which is used all the time and has been. So there's another thing which was like the ultimate trump card that pro-choice people use. I'm not saying there aren't very good justifications for pro-choice, and my pro-life stance is really in a holding pattern, an abeyance, I suppose, since listening to Heather Hying's discussion and understanding more about conception, which I was totally wrong about. It's not conception is not it's not an event, it's a process. Conception, I'm not talking about fetal development, I'm not talking about zygote, I'm not talking about the continuum from zygote to conceptum to zygote to embryo to fetus. I'm talking about conception. And it turns out that calling conception a categorical change rather than a point on a spectrum is as ludicrous as saying birth is a categorical change. Of course, there's no category change between a baby before birth and after birth. What there's no magical fucking transformation that occurs before, when labour starts and when the baby's delivered. And it turns out the same thing goes for conception, so the more you learn. So I'm like, okay, and there is a point in time that I'm not really sure which developmental stage. I don't know if it goes beyond embryo. It might go into fetus. I'm not even sure. But it is a human being and it is a human life. So it's human and it's alive. We can agree it's a human life. And there are many reasons to argue for the pro-life position, such as, the loss of a future or something like that, which is what people cite when it comes to murder. This is the life that person has lost. So if you can use that for murder of a living person, how much potential they had, how much, whatever, you can do the same thing for an unborn human as well. You know, you can make the same argument. You can't have one or without the other. Murder's it's not even a legal term, it's just an emotional term. So, but there is a point where the idea is that, you see, and I've been, this is like, you've seen, like the curate, the DNC, I think it's called, a lot of abortions are just done by a pill, but some abortions are done by literally putting a scalpel up and cutting the unborn human. Sorry, it's an unborn human. I'm sorry, it's an unborn human. That's not an emotional term, that's not a political position, it's just a biological fact. It's an unborn human. By cutting it up with a scalpel and, into pieces that can pass through the cervix, and then I guess suctioning them out or pulling them out with lever, and then you use a curette just to get all the extra bits out. You don't want a little hand or foot rotting inside the womb. And then there are plenty of photos, and you can find these photos, and they're quite horrible, seeing these little, they're not humanoid, they're human, and they're dead. Sometimes they're dying. Of just baby, little tiny humans that have been hacked to death, like the Rwandan genocide. Now, the matter under discussion here, and a lot of pro-lifers, and I was one of them. As I say, I'm not sure. I'm not saying I'm pro-choice. I don't think it's a choice matter. I think it's a matter of situation, not choice as such. I don't think choice can override human rights, and I think human rights extend to unborn humans. I don't think someone else has. They talk about choice as if it's choice made. You could say the same thing about a murderer. Pro-choice. I chose to murder this person. Yeah, you're pro-choice. Again, reductio ad absurdum. I'm not saying that people should be able to do that. I'm saying if you're going to use the argument in that sense, you have to commit to it in that sense. If you reject it in that sense, you have to reject it in that sense. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying you've got to come up with a better argument, because that argument fails on the very terms that you have founded your argument. If you think that pro-choice extends to the killing of living people, I commend you for born people. I commend you for your consistency. Won't necessarily agree with you morally, but thank you for being logically consistent. You cannot reject an argument in one context because it doesn't suit you, because it suits you emotionally to endorse that, and then reject the argument on the other because your emotion's on the different side. Do you see? So the reason that I couldn't call myself pro-life anymore, but I don't know what I am. I'm not pro-choice either. as yet anyway. But what I'm getting around to saying is there is a point where, for intents and purposes, that is not sentient in the sense that it is utterly unaware. It cannot suffer, but hasn't developed any nerve sensation. I don't even know if it's developed nerve endings. Remember, these are all it develops, right? It develops in the uterus, so it develops bit by bit. So, the ability to feel pain is something that is used for our survival. It's there to let us know that we're in danger. We need to do something. We take pain pills when we know there's something wrong, but it's either being sorted or we can't do anything about it, like cancer or something. Yeah, I get it. I'm still going to take the morphine because, sorry dude, it's metastatic now, or whatever. But these little humans at a certain point have not yet developed the capability to experience suffering, neither physically nor psychically. So the suffering argument goes. And as much as I like Ben Shapiro, I hear his wife's a doctor. He's wrong. Yeah, he's wrong. He's using his emotions. And he's reasoning logically, not emotionally, but he's wrong about the premises. And I suspect he's an Orthodox Jew to the max, so I think his commitment to his faith is stronger than his commitment to look more deeply into it. And his wife is also Orthodox Jew as well, so doctors can have their own opinions and they can be wrong. All roads do lead to Rome. I keep going off into branches, but what I'm coming back to say is that there are 2 points I'm trying to make. Well, I was talking about autism, so it's supposed to be, there's a very strong, so far the hypothesis is, as I'm aware, is absolutely still wide open and getting stronger, that autism is not it's not a failure of development, it's a different way of developing, and it might be dropping off rather than lacking. It's like the difference between being childless and child-free. So I regard myself as being child-free, whereas there are people who really want children but are childless. So it's a matter of, are you gaining something or losing something, or are you keeping something or gaining something or losing something personally, and I've felt this way, and I mean this very, very, very seriously. People laugh, and I laugh too because it's kind of funny, but I would really, especially now for fuck's sake, but even back when I had no suicidal intentions at all, in my 30s, I very, very seriously, I'd pass any lie detector any moment of the day. I would have rather been diagnosed with cancer than pregnancy. And the reason for that was because I'm pro-life and I hate kids. For some reason, pro-choicers think that pro-lifers want everyone to have kids all the time. No, half of us don't even want kids ourselves. We just think that, I say we, I guess I'm talking about the historic me, but it's not about wanting to procreate. The pro-life position and the pro-choice position are not flip sides of the same coin. And it's like those stupid pro-choices, because I argue with people whom I tend to broadly agree with, and at least in conclusion. It's a silly thing to say, pro-abortionists. There are very few pro-abortionists. What they say, the right to choose, arguing for the right to choose is not the same thing as arguing for the right. It's not the same as arguing for universal abortion. But the pro-life position is arguing for the universal prohibition of abortion. Those are not mirror images. Those are very different debates, and they get very mixed up together. And so this idea that I have a deficit because parts of my brain haven't developed, actually, it may well be that I'm just one of the, actually, we now know quite vast number of people, because there have not been enough diagnoses, but there have been very good modelled extrapolations that there are a lot of autistic people around, and they don't know, and nobody else knows. And so it's not an epidemic of, oh, you've got autism, you've got autism, you've got autism. It's like, no, loads of people have it. But we've only just understood what it is in a kind of Theseus's ship kind of way, where it's a real mindfuck. It's like burnout. Burnouts it was just a thing that people would say, and it didn't mean anything particular. I mean, it had meaning, but it wasn't a diagnosis. Now we know from neuroimaging and other, from more sophisticated neuroimaging, and indeed the notion that it should be investigated with neuroimaging. And then I think, endocrinology and stuff, that these are, and cardiovascular, this is a real medical disaster, and it's acquired, and we're fucking people who have it up, and we are creating